Hello, this is Bill Groner, host of the Connection Effect podcast. Welcome to the Connection Effect Aftershow, a space where we slow things down and unpack how to make practical the wisdom of the guests from our previous episode. Today, we're reflecting on our conversation with world-renowned forgiveness and adversity researcher Fred Luskin, founder of the Stanford Forgiveness Project. I'm joined by Ava, Gaia, and Harry, all fellow graduates of the Masters in Applied Positive Psychology program at the University of Pennsylvania, my classmates. Harry will be facilitating today's discussion, and I'll be taking a guest seat at the table. Harry, over to you.
Bill, thanks. It is great to be here and great to be with my friends. If you just finished the Fred Luskin episode, you may be kind of coming out of what you felt it was like a therapy session. At least that's how I felt. And I think of the episodes that I've listened to so far and the connection effect, it was easily the one that I took the most notes on. And not just because I knew I was going to be on the after show too, I should add. I wanted to start by Bill directing a few questions at you coming off of that, just still processing the listening of it. So the first one is, how did you find Fred? What drew you to Fred to have as a guest on the show?
Fred and I went to the same alma mater of Binghamton University, and I created for Binghamton a tier talks that inspire, educate, and resonate, where alumni come back and they share their wisdom. And he spoke about 6 years ago on the work that's this podcast. And what I enjoyed so much is not his down-to-earthness, but the fact that he came wearing shorts and sandals when he was speaking in front of a large group of people, but that there was something so practical and down-to-earth about the way he spoke.
That's great. You know, as you say that, I'm just laughing and thinking of his style, listening to the episode too. And I think it is the first episode or podcast I'd listened to where I heard this sentence: if my father recovers, I'll stop eating ding-dongs. And that's when he was talking about, being stuck in the bargaining stage of grief. And so just the ding-dong was a word in a podcast episode won me over. Okay, follow up, Bill, then for you. Before we talk about how we felt on the episode, I'm curious as to what you were feeling as you were interviewing Fred. What were some of the feelings that were going through you?
First was the sheer volume of things that he was saying that I was going to take away, and the enormity of the task and taking wisdom like this and applying it to your day-to-day life. There was almost too many things. And it's one of the reasons we're doing the after show is we need to talk about this. And my favorite takeaway that I'm now using regularly is when you're facing adversity, it's not the adversity that's the problem. It's your response to the adversity. And for so many different reasons, that is something that whether somebody cuts me off in the street because they're walking too fast, or somebody is rude, or in a personal relationship, we're having some dissonance, every single time I'm realizing if I'm reacting to that, stop, because it's not them, it's me. And that starts me on a journey of like how I can be better.
Powerful. And I can imagine too, as you're trying to manage being the host of the show, processing your own thoughts that Fred is bringing out, and you had to be fascinating. So thanks for sharing that. As we get started, again, if you just listen to the episode, Bill left us with 2 questions. And the first one went like this: on a daily basis, faced with an onslaught of doom. By the way, I just paraphrased that in, Bill, because I thought it sounded more provocative for our discussion. Can we place more of an emphasis on the abundance of positives that the universe provides? And it fits really well, Bill, with what you just shared too. So it goes to really, how do you redirect your attention? And a quote that I grabbed from Fred from the episode was, my attention was the biggest contributor to my happiness or unhappiness. And an impactful part of what he shared was that grocery store story where he had his epiphany. So I'm curious for us then, if we could share just what are some examples you've had of an epiphany story related to attention. And to warm you up, I will say that in the role I have as a coach, I'm often like debriefing assessments with executive leaders. And many of these are 360 assessments. So they're hearing from all of their folks. And what's fascinating to me, and it happens every time I've done hundreds of these, they go right to the bad stuff. Like they can't help themselves. And I have reviewed this assessment first, and I know that 99% of it is awesome. And yet they want to spend the hour that we have talking about the negative thing. And I think it really applies. It's just a natural negativity bias for all of us. So I'll throw that to the group to share. What examples do you have in regards to this attention and your ability to redirect it?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in because one story comes to mind. This literally happened to me, I think, about a week ago. And for those who might not know, I live in Los Angeles. So the craziness of driving here alone is enough to make you go cuckoo bananas. So I woke up and I was just having like a horrible day. I left my apartment. I got to the street. I got a ticket like 2 minutes before I came out. I was so annoyed. I went to work. I got stuck in traffic. I parked. I went upstairs. It was a photo shoot day actually for our company. I spilled orange juice all over my new
No.
set.
Oh no.
And I was so angry. And it was just bad thing after bad thing after bad thing. And I remember coming home to my partner, Dan, and I was complaining to him. I was like, this is the worst day I've ever had. And he was like, well, tell me about it. And I walked through the day and I said, I went downstairs, I got a ticket. He's like, oh, could you pay off your ticket? I said, yeah, I could do that. He said, okay, you went into the workplace, people complimented you on your new set. Didn't that feel good? I was like, yeah, that felt really nice. He was like, you got to go home early because you were having such a bad day. I was like, yeah, I guess I did. And he was like, it sounds like you actually didn't really have that bad of a day. I was like, you know what? You're right. And I really feel like that relates to Fred's whole point around not over extending or paying too much attention essentially to the negative and what happened. So it really helped to shift my attention there, to have somebody help me shift it to something more positive.
Dan was channeling his inner Fred Luskin, it sounds like.
He was, yeah, without knowing it. Yeah, totally.
What I love about this question is the concept of where you place your attention. I remember when I started reading the newspaper, every article, and I'd walk around with a slightly bad mood because of the negativity bias of the newspapers. And then I realized, my gosh, there's no need to do that. I'm putting myself in my own negative space. It doesn't mean I can't read the headlines and be aware of what's going on. But if I spend 2 hours reading something negative or something upsetting to me, then I'm spending 2 hours of focusing on what Ava was doing about driving in LA, the parking ticket, spilling the orange juice. So I love the concept of just be aware of what's going on, but don't spend so much time reading what makes you unhappy. So I sort of love that sort of very practical application of placing your attention on positive things.
I can definitely resonate with that too, especially with social media. So much of it is so heavy constantly. And I have to be so intentional about when I am and am not using social media in order to protect my peace in that way, or follow accounts that uplift joy or do things that I care about, and kind of not only pay attention to where my attention is going, but what is added to the feed to begin with, because my attention is going to be on my feed no matter what. And what's in my control is what I follow and what I engage with.
What's a little difficult here, though, is what's making you aware that you should be changing your attention. Like, not everybody has a partner that Ava has who is responsive right there and sort of redirects. And to some level, we have to figure out how we can all make ourselves aware that, oh, I'm placing my attention in the wrong place. And just change that. And I always wanted us as a nonprofit positive connection initiative to create like hats or T-shirts that are all positive interventions that say something like, look at the positive, or something that is an external reminder to help us help ourselves.
I think it's not only looking at the positive and savoring. I think it's also being really intentional about the negative things, because ignoring it is also not helpful. So when we see something that makes us angry, how can we use that emotional competence that Fred Luskin was talking about and direct that anger in a more productive way and engage with our community? And I think the easiest way for me to direct my attention more positively is by trying to support other people and giving myself my attention, whatever gifts I have to share with the world, to other people, because otherwise I can get stuck in my own head, and there's just so much more joy when shared with others.
What a cool Gaia strategy to have when you go there. I felt the same thing listening to it, and it reminded me of the story. But Fred said something to the point that, you have to have your reaction, whatever it is, and then decide that could be helpful. It could be helpful to motivate you to talk to someone, or he even shared the example, or you may even have the strengths and the energy to start an organization that addresses this big issue. So it can lead to positive things. You all know that my late wife went through a long cancer battle. And we had many times where we got news that was just a punch in the gut. And probably the quote of hers that she only said once that I shared, though, the most speaks directly to this. And it would paraphrased it over the years, but she would say something like, whenever you get this bad news, feel how you need to feel, mad or sad or angry, and then go to bed. And when you get up, put your big girl pants on and live your life.
I love that.
And that, I think, speaks very directly to what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Harry.
I love that, Harry. I agree. We don't want to say that negative emotions are bad. They're part of who we are. They're evolutionary. They help us mobilize attention, grab resources, vent. We can all be, in positive psychology, a little toxic positive by telling people we should never feel negative. No, we want to feel negative. We want to understand it. And Guy, I love your example of where you said, Fred mentioned, if you're feeling negative, then go do something about it instead of just bemoan it. So I sort of like that a lot.
One thing that I really loved him bringing attention to was the importance of a grieving period or an adjustment period when something bad does happen, because we're going to be faced with adversity, challenge, grief, all of those things within our lifetime. So yes, feel the feelings. Thank you, Joe, for that beautiful quote. And what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, 100%. I feel like that was one of the things that resonated most with me in this whole podcast, was because I don't know about you all, but I feel like the concept of letting go or just let go never, ever, ever resonated with me growing up. I absolutely hated it, because I thought that it meant that you just had to forget about it, not feel your feels, and then do something else, distract yourself, whatever. And that felt so inauthentic to me. But I think what I loved about Fred's whole strategy was using forgiveness as a place of action, if that makes sense. It's a skillful action to forgive. And the first period is acknowledge those emotions and then immediately move through forgiveness. Not immediately, maybe, perhaps, but move with forgiveness as a skillful action to go do something more productive. And I think that completely shifted my mindset around letting go.
But it's a great setup for what my next question would be. And it was powerful at the beginning of the episode, Bill, to hear Fred say, this all starts with grief. Like, you don't have forgiveness unless you start with grief. And then if you get stuck in some sort of coping or something that you can't settle, then grief becomes a grievance. And I'd never connected those two words before, because
Same.
you have to have a grievance, right, Gaia, to then create the grudge. And so we got this great, GR alliteration going too. So grief and grievance and grudge. But it really sets up well one of the definitions that Fred gave about forgiveness that comes from grief. And he set up, as we've already alluded to, you grieve, You accept whatever reaction you have, and then you let it go. And this concept of letting go. And Abba, that's where you took us there. But the quote that I wrote down is, forgiveness is unraveling the holding on that you are doing. And it's this concept of, I can't change what happened, so why do I hold on? And I think something we had to talk about in the after show is this question, like, what are you holding on to? And that's where I think I came out of that episode feeling like I went through a therapy session, because I did ask myself that question, what am I holding on to? And we could all go there. I'm not asking you to then go into a therapy session with us, but if you could just share your thoughts on either something you're holding on to or things you're holding on to, and then how this episode impacted that, I think that could be really powerful.
I have something that comes to mind for me. This is a little bit harder, so thank you all for the grace in sharing this. When I was in high school, somebody who I was very close to passed away. Speaking of grief. And it was a tragic accident. After he passed, we learned that he might have been drinking and driving. The roads were slippery. It was just this collection of tragedy that hit my community like a wrecking ball. And there was a time where I was really angry with him, angry that he would drink and drive, angry that he would be reckless in this way, and in some ways, angry that he would leave us with this mess to clean up. And at some point, I had to let that go, so to speak, because there was nowhere to put my anger. There was nothing that he could say or do to make it better. He'd passed on. There's nothing left for me to hold on to in that way, except for my own tough emotions that were all raveled up so tightly.
My gosh.
And I'm now working through these feelings of gratitude for him and his beautiful short life, and also in what I learned in the time that I had with him and what I learned from his passing. Not only letting go of those tight emotions, but also seeing the way that my community came together in a new way. There were people who were friends with him that I wasn't friends with, but they knew that he and I were close. And if we saw each other in the hallway, they would come up to me and give me a hug. I had never experienced that before. The funeral was so packed. My mom held me in a way that I never would have accepted in any other circumstances at 17 years old. But I learned just how well a community can come together through tragedy. And that has always been this silver lining that I hold on to. So now for me, I'm recognizing that I still hold some of this grief within me. And it feels like a process of honoring that grief and honoring his life in revisiting it in a new way many years down the road.
Gaia, that
It's
is so
beautiful.
powerful. So thank you for sharing that. And I can feel your feelings, and it's causing me to think about similar stories that are connected to my life too. What do you think, Gaia, helped you get to that first step of looking at this differently?
I had to acknowledge the way that we are all so human. We all mess up in very different ways and with very different consequences. His happened to be grave, but that's not the case for everybody. And so I had to really acknowledge that he messed up and it was the worst consequence possible. But we are all capable of messing up. And I hope that when I mess up, as I have, as I do, as I will continue to do, people will give me the grace in understanding that it's part of being human.
Yeah. Fred talked about in one of the sections of the episode that you can rage against reality. This is my paraphrasing, but reality always wins. Like, you can want to change what was, but reality always wins. That's really powerful, and it's got me thinking too. Bill.
I mean, that's a tough thing to follow, and I'm going to do something with much less emotion. But Gaia, thanks for sharing. I have become upset, and I'm not going to do a left-to-right political thing here, about the politics involved with the judiciary, the judges in our system. Meaning there's a relationship between the way that I have found judges are now ruling and the political party that caused them to be in that position. So if they're appointed by left-leaning, then their decisions are left-leaning. As a retired litigator, I've always followed the court system, and I've always believed of a great deal of objectivity, and perhaps I've been naive, but that's been very upsetting to me with this politicalization of the judiciary. And recently, and that's an adversity, I've come to accept it, and I'm moving forward. And what's really interesting is your question to Gaia just then about what allowed you to move forward. I have the same answer, is my realization that we are human. The people who are choosing the judges are human. The people who are judges are human. And it's almost like the frailty or the vulnerability of being human is one of the reasons why our system is less than perfect. So I think I'm past the acceptance stage, and I really let it go. And I do know that, hey, you can write letters, you can make sure you vote for the right people that are going to nominate the right people. There's things that we can do. And so I'm on that stage of the process.
Yeah. If I can add to that too, I first of all, thank you so much, Bill and Gaia, for sharing. I equally hold very similar sentiments around what's going on in the world, and even just thinking about forgiveness with grief in particular. There was something Fred said to this effect around existential forgiveness, if folks remember, and it was something that really stood out to me, because I think one of the things that I'm trying to let go of, or be better at letting go of, is the grief, I think, that collectively we feel around the world for different world events that are happening. Particularly in Iran, I'm Iranian American, and a lot of that history is really complicated and really wrapped up with anger, collective anger, I would say, diasporic anger. And one of the questions I remember, Bill, I think you asked was, what can somebody do when they feel like they don't have the time, the energy, the resources, the power to change anything? Which is exactly how I feel about the situation in Iran. I'm an American hundreds of miles away, thousands of miles away. And Fred said something that really struck me. And he said, you begin by forgiving yourself for doing the best that you can. And I think that perspective really shifted something within me. And I think maybe, Bill, if you feel the same way of Gaia too, like you can let go with forgiving yourself first, potentially.
Fred, I wrote down this quote, Ava, that perfectly applies with this concept of existential forgiveness when Fred was talking about that. Resolve the upset that you've created around life. And, as we say that, we don't want to dismiss that these are really serious geopolitical world issues that are creating this upset, but that it is an upset that I create based on what I'm seeing. And then he, in his own Fred way, which I was really enjoying just listening to him and his personality and his voice, he said, so resolving the upset you've created around life is the key. Otherwise, it's just life. Like, it is just life. And it's hard for us to simplify life that way when, especially right now, it is so incredibly complex and volatile and all of those things.
I loved what you just said and what Ava said before that about forgiving yourself.
Yeah.
Every day, I think I want to aspire that when I have a negative emotion or I'm upset at something, that number one, it's okay. And number two, accepting, forgiving myself for being angry or upset, and then realizing it's okay, just accepting that we're humans. That's how we respond to adversity. And if we start getting angry at ourselves and thinking we're losers and why am I doing this or why am I, then we're compounding the problem. So I just love that, forgiving yourself for the way we respond and recognizing our own humanity, I think helps us breathe a little bit, then move forward.
Definitely.
I think so too. And I almost see this as a threshold. Well, you can be upset with yourself and forgive yourself up until a certain point. Where's that threshold where you decide something has to change? This is no longer working for me. This behavior, this thought process, what is it that I'm going to do? What is it that I'm going to commit to for my own self-improvement?
Fred gave a bit of a strategy when he said, to ask yourself 2 questions like, can I impact this? Is what I'm doing right now impacting the problem? And then is doing that making me happier? And if the answer is no to both, then in his Fred way, he's like, well, then try something different.
Yeah. It was so
And
simple.
it's so damn simple. And I think though, like that simple strategy can be a cool takeaway. And in my job as a coach, I'm finding myself being that voice. I'm kind of the detached observer voice that gets to ask those questions. And where they lead to, it is a perfect setup to the question that I wanted to pose to you all next. It really leads to the surprise of the episode, Bill, and that I did not think that Fred would reference Dr. Phil. But Fred brought up Dr. Phil, and
He did.
that great question of, how's that working for you? And no matter what your feelings are, listeners, about Dr. Phil, that question was what Fred said it was, a really powerful question of how's that working for you? And what I'm curious for you all to comment on is I have found now, helping myself, helping others, that I really think that my job as a coach is ultimately to help you get to optimal. And then when you're at optimal, you have the best chance to deal with all this shit that is in your life and is in the world. And so even Ava, going back to thinking about this huge issue in Iran and people's lives are at stake, and so many situations that we could all come up with where people are dying, like this is serious stuff. But I'm not going to be in a good place, in my best place to figure out how I can make an impact unless I am at optimal. And so this concept of asking yourself, how's that working for you? To figure out then what are the strategies I can use to get to my best, to then figure out how to be at my best to do something about it, really hit me like a 2x4 over the head, much like Fred described his wife hitting him with the 2x4 of truth and saying, grow up, quit being an idiot. So I'll let you all comment on that. How's it working for you, or how do you use that question day to day?
Well, I'm going to give you a very benign example. When you live with somebody, whether it's kids, a spouse, a partner, you're going to find that they may put the toothpaste in a place that, is the wrong place, or the shoes, and they're not doing it the way you would expect. There's rules of coexisting in a living arrangement that maybe you have one set and they have another. And I can't imagine, I know that I have, and I'm assuming a lot of people have, repetitive conversations with that person and trying to explain what the better way or a different way to do it is. Fred said at one point, if you have the same conversation 72 times, at some point, it's time to change. And I found after Fred's episode, all these conversations I have, not just with spouse or friends or whatever, but the things that are recurrent, if you're not getting anywhere, do something different. Give up, yield, accept, are so much easier than the battle to make your point or try and get the change in behavior that you're expecting. So I sort of love that. And here's the ticker. Any one of us who are doing the same thing 5 or 10 times, you're having the same conversation with somebody over and over again. That should be the message of is this really working? And, and maybe it's time to change.
Yeah, I love that. I totally resonate with that, Bill. I have a really bad tendency to ruminate. I try not to show it, but I think those people who are closest to me will notice. I constantly go through the same loop over and over and over in my head. Same as you, Bill, having the same arguments over and over and over again. And I remember my mom actually said something very similar to Fred many years ago. It made me laugh actually when I heard Fred said the same thing, where she was like, if being angry works for you or being upset works for you, she's like, call me. Call me when that works, because genuinely you'll have found a new discovery. She's like, we'll make a new discovery together. Like, literally tell me when that works for you. I was like, okay, wow. And it just absolutely doesn't. And I know it's so simple, but the try something else was, again, reminding me that forgiveness is not inaction. Forgiveness does not mean throwing up your hands and saying, well, I accept, whatever negative situation to continue happening, but it's literally just to redirect and try even a very simple action. So sometimes simplicity works. I don't know. It's nothing wild, but it does.
I want to riff on your word ruminate. I have a lot of
Yeah.
friends who are ruminating on politics, social issues, the environment, and they're just putting themselves into this negative, dizzy spin, and they're not getting anywhere with it. They're just making themselves anxious over and over and over again. And I love Fred's advice, which is do something different. Either act on it, write your congressman, run for office, write letters to the editor, just do something. But certainly just sitting there and having the same negative self-loop is not bringing them anywhere. And it's time to do something different. And I love just a practical sense of like, just do anything different because what you're doing isn't working.
This is
Yeah.
like screaming agency to me.
Yes.
We all have some skill set, something that we can offer, whatever challenge is at hand. If we're that frustrated about something, what is it that we can do to make it better? Even you're just moving the needle forward one little bit, it feels better than keeping it inside of yourself.
Agreed. It's interesting too, you all. I feel like even the line of questioning that Fred asked himself or asked his participants was really, really simple. Like, do y'all remember the activity where he asked, how many of you woke up today with a roof over your head? How many of you woke up today with food in the fridge? How many of you woke up today with, I don't know, running water? How many of you gave thanks for that today? And almost nobody said anything. I almost feel like even that is an action in and of itself. That is something within your power where you can ask yourself these simple lines of questions to get yourself out of whatever ruminating hole that you're in or loop that you're in. I don't know if that resonated with folks, but I remember that was like a really, really powerful and I think simple way to take action.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of people who don't have food, a roof over their head, or running water. Maybe they have love in their family.
Right.
Maybe they have some other blessing in their life that they can call in that moment.
Love that.
And my guess is, Gaia, that's where their attention goes. Their attention goes to those things that are always there and can help them through that. It seems like this key is when you get stuck in some coping space and forget that you can find something bright. We can really almost say no matter what the situation. And you can go back to even some classic books like Man's Search for Meaning, where you get Viktor Frankl saying that there is still the freedom of choice about how I feel, no matter what's happening to me. I still get that freedom to choose, and that is powerful. And when you can recall on that, it gives you the best chance, no matter how shitty the circumstances are, to be at optimal to figure out what to do next. I want to transition us to in a way that I think really fits with what we've been talking about, because Fred did offer up a lot of strategies on how you cope. And he mentioned, reminders like, hey, you've gotten through things like this before, or the world has been through things like this before. Second, you're not alone. And I know some people are very lonely, and I don't want to minimize that. But thinking about who is with you or who cares about you. And then his last one, which was very Fred of him, he said, distract yourself, do something. And then his choices he gave, Bill, I don't know if you remember this, were either running or knitting. which I think I would choose running. But I do have a lot of friends who knit too. So don't forget the power of knitting. And then we transitioned to one of the things that was my favorites and really got me thinking. And I think Bill, it left us at a really high point in the episode. And that's when he referenced the Dalai Lama and asked that question, who has been kind to me today? I would say that just even as I ask that question, who has been kind to me today, I get emotional just verbalizing that question. And his advice that if you just spend some thinking on each day on being thankful about people who have been kind to you, because our wonderful brains are going to stick with their negativity bias and throw lots of fun stuff to ruminate on, Ava, right? But this purposeful kindness activity just smacked me in the head. I was recently over the holidays with all of my family. So I had my son, his fiance, daughter, son-in-law, and my granddaughter. And so that's our like immediate group. And it's rare for us to get together over the holidays. And that's usually when I will find myself saying something to the whole group. And I know what I'm going to say, but they know that like dad's going to say something. But before I could do that, my daughter spoke up and she kind of played my role. And as opposed to starting with all of the different things that have happened wonderfully with the family, he looked at me and said, Dad, I know you just lost one of your best friends. And I had just 2 weeks before. Mm-hmm. And after a fight with cancer, which is what I lost my wife over, he had asked me to do the eulogy. He literally asked me to do the eulogy. And it's a person I've known since kindergarten and college roommate, groomsman, all of the things. And we've been friends for over 50 years. But my daughter took the time to say, you've been grieving and we love you. And it is wonderful that you were able to do his eulogy and honor him. And I just was not expecting it at all. And that wonderful kindness just, I mean, it was holidays. So the Grinch was on. I mean, I think my heart's pretty big, but my heart grew 10 sizes that day in that moment. And there is power no matter how fucking bad things get. There is power in kindness, and I mean exponential power. And I just wanted to get, as a way to kind of close up our after show, I thought this would be a great way to end, just to hear some of your stories of kindness and where that took you.
I think for me, it was that one popular kid giving me a hug in the hallway.
Great example, Gaia.
I mean, I was not expecting that. I don't think we talked very much afterwards, but we just saw each other's humanity in a new way that meant the world to me.
So if I could reframe the question to how can we use reflections of kindness to enhance our well-being after an adversity? Is it really practical if you're going through an adverse event to then do the Fred exercise that he did with me? Is it practical? And maybe it is. I'm not saying it's not.
Well, I mean, is it, Bill? I mean,
yeah.
Answer it.
I think you have to allow yourself to grieve and feel first sometimes. Or maybe it's part of the grieving process for you. But sometimes it can be too soon. Sometimes you need more time before you can get to who has been kind.
Yeah, so timing is huge. I asked my sister, who's a very happy person and a person who really is in significant well-being, about her gratitude practice. Thinking that, every morning she may get up and write a little gratitude journal, which is standard practice amongst people. And she said, I reflect all throughout the day for the gratitude I have. As a matter of fact, at 4:00 as I was driving here, I was thinking about you. That's why I reached out to you, and that's why we're having dinner the next day. And I sort of like that. I mean, is this practical? I don't know, but would I like to move forward and reflecting more during my day about the abundance that the universe provides to us, as Fred talked about the kind acts that occasion to me and to others? I think so. I mean, I think I'd like to. I think that's one maybe homework I'm going to give, is to make that part of my sort of daily self-reflections. I think that softens the bumps of the road in a crazy world. I'm going to give myself that homework and see how it works. I'll report back.
I love that. I'm with you, Bill. I feel like it's maybe overdone or overstated to only do it in the morning or have a gratitude practice in the morning or at night. But I love this idea of weaving it throughout the day, even for the little things. I think, honestly, due to Fred's podcast, yesterday I opened the fridge and I would never, think another thought from grabbing a soda or whatever it was. But I looked at my fridge. I was like, oh my gosh, I have an abundance of food. That's enormous. That's huge. That's something to be grateful for today. So I do think that with time, it can shift your mindset, whether you're intentionally practicing it or not. And I do love, Harry, too, thinking about kindness throughout the day. I feel like when I was listening to the episode, somebody at work told me something very simple, and it mattered a great deal to me. And she said, you were hired here for a reason. You were brought in here to bring value on a day where I wasn't feeling like I was bringing any sort of value at all. And so I think all of this is just shifting perspective over time, slowly, little by little.
Can I share one more thing that has really stuck with me?
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so there's this way of looking at emotions similar to food, where you have them, you eat them, but they have to be properly digested. When they get stuck in your system, all tangled up like that mess that we were talking about earlier, that's when they can be really challenging. You have to continue flowing through the emotions when it's time and release them.
Love that. I'm adopting that, Gaia. I'm stealing that. That's incredible.
And I think that creating is a great way to release emotions. Like art in any form is a beautiful method of catharsis and channeling emotion into something new.
It's trying something different.
This is great, Gaia. Well, and even as I mentioned earlier, running or knitting, Fred was saying moving or creating are two of the ways that can keep your system flowing, as I'm going to now use that as a metaphor from here on out. I would say is as we come to, maybe a good closing point for this show, one, I think it's clear that we could keep on talking about this. And so I hope the listeners are picking up on that, and it creates some conversations in regards to the questions that we've answered and some of the great ideas and thoughts and just even vulnerable sharings that I really appreciated as being a part of this. I think what we're doing too goes back to one of the things, Bill, that you closed with, you and Fred, when you were talking about, practicing the conditions that create happiness. And I think doing something like this after show, just what we've done, is a great example of practicing the conditions that create happiness. Fred was very clear that life is going to life. And we're going to have to deal with things that will create those negative emotions that we need to feel. But the biggest takeaway for me is to just not get stuck there and realize that there is a way out. And the way out, which can include forgiveness tools to acceptance, is going to leave you at a better place than to live the life you want to live, to put on your big girl pants and do those things that we're all blessed to be on the planet to do, no matter what challenges face us. Bill, I'll turn it over to you to close this out.
Thanks, Harry. And thanks to your excellent facilitation. Gaia, Ava, thank you so much for showing up today. To our listeners, thanks for listening to this edition of the After Show, and we really appreciate you joining us. The conversation doesn't stop here. Visit our Substack at connection.net/Substack and add your voice. We want to hear from you. We want to respond. We want you to be part of this community. We want to keep this conversation going. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Again, one more. Kidding. No, Sue, y'all are the best. Thank you.
Gaia, go ski.
Don't mind if I do.